This program is brought to you in association with First National Bank of Botswana. Welcome to the program. In this segment of First Issues, we speak to a young Botswana man whose passion for leadership development and quality education has seen him achieve quite a bit in such a short amount of time. The understanding is that in many parts of the world, young people are leading innovative actions that are building and promoting inclusive governance. In spite of this, they continue to face multiple forms of exclusion, discrimination, and marginalization, even though they should be more systemically supported as trusted partners and leaders in sustainable development. So what is the missing piece, especially here in Botswana? Kaene speaks to us about how inclusive thought leadership should be inculcated in society to better address matters affecting youth. Kaene, thank you so much for coming on First Issues and affording us your time. It's a pleasure having you on our platform. We're talking with you today about inclusive leadership, thought leadership. Let's start with first here. What does thought leadership mean to you, and how do you think it can be used to empower youth to be more involved in issues affecting them in the country?
I'm a huge advocate for thought leadership, particularly when my social enterprise Change Africa actually works to champion thought leadership. And what we mean by that is making sure that young people not only are able to amplify their voice, but are able to also meaningfully contribute to national decision-making processes. What does that look like? That means that a young person is supposed to be well-informed. So making decisions that essentially are driven by really well-researched, evidence-based, access to that kind of information. So I think what's pivotal about thought leadership is any person who's able to make a decision that is well informed. And for Botswana particularly, what we strive for is to see young people being able to hold leadership positions by also knowing what policies directly affect them, what legal structures they need to protect them. So often at times, we often talk about tokenism. So we often talk about young people being put in leadership positions, but they're not actually meaningfully contributing. And I think often the case is that they don't have the necessary capability or capacity to do so. So it's easier then to just look at the numbers to say, we have 20% of young people in this amount of leadership platforms, but we're not really internalizing to say how many of them were able to meaningfully contribute, how many of them actually said something that would translate into high-level development impact. So thought leadership for me is pivotal because it really deals about empowerment of young people.
You've worked with organizations of influence such as the United Nations. You've been involved in, very high-level roundtable conversations. Perhaps at this point you could speak to exactly what it is that you did at those organizations and maybe demonstrate some quantifiable results as an outturn of your interventions, if there are any.
Well, definitely. I think just to tap into my experience, I was very humbled and also privileged that I became the youngest Botswana at the time, at the age of 18, to have work experience at the United Nations. This was in Switzerland. And for me, I was afforded the opportunity to actually work with some of the high-level ambassadors, particularly for the trade arm of the UN. And my work actually translated into some of the policy discussions that looked at bilateral and multilateral multilateral affairs. But if I was to take it home ground, it's my work with my organization, the Inspired Horizons Association, particularly the Young Mother Support Network, where we have a huge advocacy arm that speak about really amplifying the voices of the girl child and making sure that we're advocating for them to be positioned in various decision-making processes. Now, to date, if you were to look at impact analysis, to date we have included over 100 of adolescent girls and young women who are especially young mothers into over 62 national, regional, and international decision-making processes. This goes all the way from the Ministry of Youth strategic planning processes to regional that speak on the SADC, as well as the United Nations Population Fund Agency, of which 6 of our young mothers were pivotal in really highlighting the importance of young mothers' lived experiences in deciding for the 7th country program, which is 2022-2026. So we are seeing really the impact of our work. We're also highlighting how advocacy in itself is rooted in a mindset change of inclusive policies as well as inclusive youth leadership.
That is amazing work that you've done and still continue to do, and it's quite commendable how much you've achieved in such a short amount of time. But do you believe that even if youth voices were amplified, the current landscape allows for their voices to be heard enough for there to be impactful change within the issues that are pressing for them?
At Debate in Botswana, we're actually engaging a lot with young people so that they can debate on key development issues of this country, particularly the policy framework and understanding how well they can translate ideas into high-level impact. And we do that by actually co-creating the safe spaces for engagement, right? We do that by actually bringing in industry-leading experts, not only experts, but also stakeholders with experience in influencing policy, because it's important for us to understand how as young people we can translate our ideas into policy, how as young people can take on what we value most, the Botswana that we want, and actually see it come alive. So I think in our way, we're trying to make sure that we're creating that pathway for so many other institutions to come on board. I do believe that as government, we need to do more, particularly make more concerted efforts in including young people in various leadership platforms like technical working groups, national thematic working groups, and also just really highlighting and nurturing. And I think it's important that I stress this. We need to make more effort in nurturing youth talent. I think in Botswana we don't do a lot of that. In Botswana we see us celebrating talent. But often at times it's very difficult to really trace our impact from idea. So from a young person coming with a brilliant idea, a young person with amazing talent, and saying, this is what we're able to do. This is the seed we have sown in this young person. And we have been influential all the way till them, representing Botswana in the global arena. We don't necessarily do that. We wait for the struggle to come in. We wait for them to then, shine in the global space. And then we say, proud Botswana.
Well, in a country where almost 50% of youth of working age is unemployed, and you having been in these roundtable discussions, having influenced policy and governance, what do you think is the best course of action to heed this cry from youth?
In my work, and I have represented Botswana in over 30 countries, particularly looking at good governance, but also youth unemployment. And my focus has always been about structural youth unemployment. And what does that look like? Structural youth unemployment means the skills mismatch. So in Botswana, we're seeing a proliferation of tertiary institutions. We're seeing a lot of colleges, universities coming up, and yet, young people that are graduating, some of them with first-class degrees, but they're still unemployed. And for me, I think the biggest challenge is that, well, two challenges really. One is that the graduates don't necessarily have the right exit level outcome, meaning they graduate with skills, with competencies that are not necessarily needed by the industries. So we are moving at a pace faster, and this is the employment sector, right? We're moving at a pace that is faster than the quality of our education. So that's the skills mismatch, right? We're using outdated policies and the education system to address 21st century realities, and that's not necessarily the case right now. I think the second thing is that the industry in itself is not actually moving at a pace that can actually match the demand. And what I mean by that is we're seeing many young people who are graduating, many young people who are unemployed, but also we're not seeing enough job creation. And in Botswana, we speak about entrepreneurship. Now we have the Ministry of Entrepreneurship, but often at times it's like we need to push young people to become entrepreneurs, whilst not everybody can be an entrepreneur, right? So we're trying to, and I would say, we're trying to put a blanket over a growing global crisis, and in particularly a growing national crisis, which is structural youth unemployment.
So then, Kaene, with your experience internationally, what key differences can you point to that speak to how much youth have been involved in influencing policy and governance?
Let me just give you quite a basic response to that. I think in the education system, particularly primary education, we saw that there's arts. At some point, we have creative and performing arts, right? And this is where we could have been quite intentional in commercializing young people's talents. Case study is arts, for instance. You see an amazing Standard 5 who is an incredible painter, who's an incredible artist. But how many of us actually know of a Standard 5 who has been able to curate a whole artwork that could be sold to other countries? How many of us actually know a 12-year-old or an 8-year-old who has been able to close down a museum, close down a whole gallery, and sponsored by the government of Botswana or sponsored by any other institution to say, we are showcasing the artwork of this person, we're commercializing that talent, right? We don't do that. Unfortunately, our policies are set for us to really value talent through academic excellence. We feel that the only way that we can really say we're supporting, the development of young people is by giving them an A-star. But what value does an A-star give if it's not commercializing?
So do you think that we would ever get to where countries in the West are in terms of systemically and structurally, as you put it, supporting youth as partners in sustainable development?
No, I definitely think so. I mean, one thing that I could, really commend His Excellency is on his priorities, the reset agenda. And I think looking at that, we talk about, mindset change. What does that actually look like? And that is really calling for more productive society, for more an intentional society that looks at a value-driven culture. And I think the more we start mirroring or really adopting that kind of mindset change, the more we start also internalizing, the modernization of democracy, the modernization of Botswana, while still holding true to our roots. And what I mean by that is in other countries, Western countries, they are making it by still sticking to their identity. They are doing amazing stuff. They're commercializing part of their culture. We go to England and we see some of the, the old artifacts, the culture, and they're commercializing using that. But in Botswana, we see young people, and particularly Bailogre, they're doing traditional dancing, they're poets, and that is something that it could be, really working from an export-led economy. We could be commercializing and exporting such talent. So I think there is an avenue where we could be doing that. I think now, by recognizing some of the more institutional frameworks that speak on the national agenda, we're seeing fragments where implementation is possible. I think now the worry is the pace at which we'll achieve that.